In 2001, a survey vessel working under contract to the Cuban government dragged a side-scan sonar across the seafloor off the western tip of the island. At roughly 650 meters down, the screen filled with shapes that had no business being shapes. Blocks, right angles, long parallel lines that looked, to everyone standing in that cabin, like streets. The team announced it. The world's press ran it for about a week, and then nothing happened. No follow-up expedition, no published survey, no core samples, no answer. More than 20 years of silence over a target that would take one funded season to settle. The Caribbean is the most intensively surveyed sea on Earth for sunken cargo, and the least surveyed sea on Earth for anything older than a Spanish galleon. That is not an accident of science. That is a budget. Before we go any further, if you want more of these, subscribe. This channel goes into the places where the official record and the physical evidence stop agreeing with each other, and where the reason for the disagreement is almost always money. Not conspiracy. Money. Who paid for the survey? Who owned the seabed? Who would have owed something if the answer came back wrong? Subscribe and stay with me, because this one runs long, and the last 20 minutes are where it stops being about ruins and starts being about a bill that is still outstanding. Start with the water, because the water is the part almost nobody accounts for. At the height of the last glacial maximum, somewhere around 20,000 years ago, global sea level sat roughly 120 meters below where it sits today. That number is not fringe. It is standard, it is in every introductory textbook, and it is derived from coral cores, oxygen isotope records, and drowned shorelines that have been mapped on every continental margin on the planet. Nobody argues about it. What almost nobody does is take that number and lay it over a bathymetric chart of the Caribbean and look at what it means. Because when you do that, the map you have been looking at your entire life stops being the map. The Bahama Banks are the clearest case. Today, the Bahamas are a scatter of thin islands sitting on top of two enormous carbonate platforms. Drop the sea 120 meters, and those platforms stop being underwater. They become land. Dry, walkable, continuous land, on the order of 10 times the surface area of the modern archipelago. The Little Bahama Bank and the Great Bahama Bank become a landmass comparable in size to a mid-sized European country. The same thing happens, at smaller scale, all across the region. The shelf north of Cuba widens enormously. The gap between Trinidad and the South American mainland closes completely, which is not speculation. That is why Trinidad has jaguars and ocelots, and mainland snakes and the other islands do not. The Yucatan shelf extends far out into what is now open water. Channels that are today serious blue water crossings narrow into things a competent canoe could handle in a morning. Then the ice melts, and it comes back up. Not smoothly, and this is the part that matters. The rise was punctuated. There are documented meltwater pulses in the record where sea level jumped many meters in a geologically brief window. Meltwater pulse 1A, around 14,600 years ago, is the famous one. Coastlines did not creep. In places, they lunged. So here's the honest version of the question this whole video is built around. If human beings were living anywhere in this region during that window, and the archaeological consensus now accepts, people were in the Americas considerably earlier than the old Clovis first model allowed, then the places those people would have chosen to live are the exact places that are now under 100 meters of warm salt water. Coasts, river mouths, sheltered bays, not the hilltops that survived. The hilltops were the marginal ground. The good ground drowned. That is not a claim about a lost civilization. That is arithmetic. And arithmetic is the reason the shape of the evidence is what it is. Which brings us to the blue holes. Scattered across the Bahamas and the Yucatan are vertical flooded caves, some of them hundreds of meters deep. During the low sea level period, they were dry caverns. Animals fell into them. People used them. Then the water came up and sealed them, and the deep water in many of these holes is anoxic, meaning there is effectively no dissolved oxygen below a certain layer. Nothing rots. Nothing gets eaten. Organic material sits there in the dark, essentially paused. Sawmill Sink on Abaco Island is the case everyone in the field points to. Divers working there in the 2000 and 2010s pulled up material that should not have survived anywhere. complete skeletons of an extinct Bahamian tortoise, a crocodile species that no longer exists on the island, bones of a flightless bird, and human remains Yucatan, the people who were living in the Bahamas when Columbus arrived. All of it preserved to a standard that terrestrial Caribbean archaeology essentially never achieves, because on land in the tropics, in acidic soil and heat and rain, organic evidence disappears fast. Sit with the implication of that. The Caribbean is a preservation nightmare. Wood is gone. Fiber is gone. Bone is usually gone. Almost everything a society actually makes and lives inside of is made of exactly those materials. What survives on land is stone, shell, ceramic, and coral. So when an archaeologist reconstructs a pre-contact Caribbean society, they are reconstructing it from the 4% of the material culture that happened to be indestructible, and the reconstruction that comes out is inevitably going to look simpler and poorer than the thing that actually existed. That is not suppression. That is taphonomy. But the effect on the story is identical, and the story has always had a price attached. Now, the ruins that did survive. If you have only ever encountered the Caribbean through a resort brochure, the standard impression is that the islands had scattered village societies and nothing more. Go to Caguana in Puerto Rico, and that impression does not survive the parking lot. Caguana is a ceremonial center with stone-lined plazas, standing monoliths carved with human and animal figures, and formal ball courts. Tibes, also in Puerto Rico, is older and has more than a dozen courts and plazas, some of them aligned in ways that track solstice and equinox positions. These are not hamlets. These are engineered public spaces that required a labor force, a calendar, and somebody with the authority to tell people to move stone. Across Hispaniola and Cuba and the Lesser Antilles, the same pattern repeats in different vocabulary. Betais, the ball courts, appear in the hundreds. There are stone collars and elbow stones, ground and polished objects of extraordinary difficulty, associated with the ball game. There is rock art in volumes almost nobody outside the region has any idea about. The Pommier Caves in the Dominican Republic hold thousands of pictographs and petroglyphs, the largest concentration of rock art in the Caribbean by a wide margin. On Mona Island, between Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, researchers working in the 2010s documented mark making across dozens of cave systems on an island that is essentially a raised limestone block with no permanent freshwater supply. People went there deliberately, went underground, and worked in the dark, and this is where the economics arrive, right on schedule. The Pommier Caves sit inside a limestone district. Limestone is aggregate, aggregate is concrete, and concrete is roads and hotels and airports. Quarrying operations have been eating the ground around those caves for decades. Protection has been declared, contested, weakened, redeclared. The site is on effectively every list of endangered heritage that exists. Nobody is hiding the rock art. Nobody has to. It is simply worth less per hectare than the rock it is painted on. And in the absence of somebody willing to pay the difference, the arithmetic resolves itself. That is the actual mechanism in this region for how a past disappears. Not a locked archive, a comparative valuation. Hold that thought, because we are about to run it forward 500 years and watch it happen at continental scale. Columbus makes landfall in 1492. Within a generation, the indigenous population of the Greater Antilles has collapsed. The numbers are genuinely contested, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Bartolomé de las Casas, who was there, wrote figures for Hispaniola in the millions. Modern estimates range from a few 100,000 to several million, and the argument has been running for a century. What is not contested is the direction and the speed. Disease did most of it. Forced labor did a great deal of the rest. And notice what the collapse was organized around. The encomienda system was not primarily a system of conquest. It was a system of labor allocation. Grants of people attached to grants of land for the purpose of extraction. Gold first in the placer deposits of Hispaniola and Puerto Rico and Cuba. When the placers ran thin, the system did not stop. It changed product. The product it changed to was sugar. This is the hinge of the entire Caribbean, and it is worth being precise about it. In the 1640s, Barbados converts from tobacco and cotton smallholdings to sugar. The transformation takes about 2 decades. Land consolidates into large estates. The white indentured smallholder population is squeezed out. enslaved African labor is imported at a scale nothing in the Atlantic had previously required. By the end of the century, the model has been copied across the region, and Barbados, an island you can drive across in under an hour, is generating more value for England than any mainland colony. Then Saint-Domingue, the western third of Hispaniola, French, and by the 1780s, it is producing something in the range of 40% of the world's sugar and a comparable share of its coffee. One colony. It is the single most profitable piece of ground in the European empires. It is also, by any measure anyone has ever applied, the most lethal, with mortality among the enslaved so high that the entire system depended on continuous replacement rather than reproduction. In 1791, it breaks. The revolution runs 13 years. In 1804, Haiti declares independence, the only state in history founded by a successful revolt of the enslaved. And in 1825, a French fleet appears off Port-au-Prince, and Haiti is presented with a bill. This is the part I want you to hear clearly, because it is documented, uncontested, and almost nobody outside the Caribbean knows it. France demanded compensation, not compensation for the enslaved, compensation to the former slaveholders for the loss of their property, and the property was people. The figure was 150 million francs, later negotiated down to 90 million. Haiti, to obtain diplomatic recognition and to get the guns off its harbor, agreed. It borrowed from French banks to make the payments, which is the elegant part, because the loans and the indemnity were both French, so the money made a circle. Haiti finished paying in 1947, more than a century, a country paying its former owners for the crime of having freed itself, financed by debt to the same nation during the exact window in which every other economy in the hemisphere was industrializing. Historians and economists who have modeled it put the compounded cost in the tens of billions of dollars in modern terms. When people ask why Haiti is poor, that is not the whole answer. But any answer that leaves it out is not an answer. It is an omission. So keep the pattern in view. The Caribbean's past has never been a neutral subject. It has been a line item, continuously, for 500 years. And that changes what gets looked for and what gets funded. Consider what actually gets excavated in this region. Underwater archaeology in the Caribbean is enormously well developed. It is also overwhelmingly shipwreck archaeology, and specifically colonial shipwreck archaeology, and more specifically, still the ones with cargo. There is a reason a Spanish wreck from the treasure fleet era has a recoverable value that can be counted and litigated. There are commercial salvage operations. There are court cases. There are investors. The Nuestra Señora de Atocha, worked off Florida by Mel Fisher's operation over 16 years, produced a recovery valued in the hundreds of millions. Now price the alternative. A submerged pre-contact site, 100 meters down on a drowned shelf, produces potentially a scatter of worked stone and some charcoal, and if the preservation gods are generous, a piece of shaped wood. Its market value is zero. Its scientific value is very high, and its funding profile is terrible, because deep water archaeology is priced like offshore oil work. Vessel time, remotely operated vehicles, positioning systems, permits, and a crew. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for a season, with no guaranteed result. Which means the deep Caribbean gets surveyed by whoever is already paying to be out there. Oil and gas, telecom cable routing, naval hydrography. And those surveys are not looking for anything old, so anything old they cross gets logged as an anomaly and left in a file. Which is precisely, exactly, what happened off Cuba. The site is on the Guanahaca Shelf near Cape San Antonio at the far western end of the island. The company, a Canadian outfit called Advanced Digital Communications, was there under a joint arrangement with the Cuban state to look for shipwrecks in the Yucatan Channel. In 2000 and 2001, they logged sonar returns showing regular geometric structures at extreme depth. Follow-up work with a remotely operated vehicle produced video, and the descriptions that came back out included smooth blocks, apparently cut, arranged in patterns. The obvious objections are the strong ones, and I will give them properly. That depth is very hard to reconcile with human occupation on any timescale involving people, because 650 meters is far below any sea level low stand in the entire period humans have existed. To get a built site down there, you need tectonic subsidence, and you need it to be substantial and localized. The region is tectonically active, sitting near the boundary between the North American and Caribbean plates, so it is not impossible on its face. But it is a very large ask, and the burden of proof sits entirely with the claim. Natural rock can also produce startling geometry. Carbonate platforms fracture along joints, blocks separate, debris fields from platform margin collapse can look, on low-resolution sonar, remarkably built. But notice what has not happened in the 20-plus years since. Nobody has gone back and settled it, and the reason is not scientific. The United States embargo on Cuba made collaboration between American institutions, which own most of the world's deep submergence capacity, and Cuban partners legally and financially painful. The original company was small, and its funding did not survive. Cuba does not have a deep water research fleet. The site sits in a political jurisdiction that makes the cheapest available answer expensive to obtain. So the honest position is this: it is probably geology. It has never been demonstrated to be geology, and the distance between those two sentences is a few $100,000 and a diplomatic arrangement that has not existed in 60 years. Make of that what you will. The Bahamas gave the region its other famous anomaly, and this one deserves a harder look because it is the one most often used to discredit the whole subject. In 1968, off North Bimini, divers documented a linear feature of large flat stones running roughly half a mile in a shallow arc under about 5 meters of water. It was named the Bimini Road. Its timing was unfortunate in a way that has poisoned discussion of it ever since, because the American psychic Edgar Cayce had stated decades earlier that evidence of Atlantis would appear near Bimini around 1968 or 69. When the stones surfaced in the press, they surfaced pre-attached to that claim. The mainstream explanation is beach rock. Beach rock is a real and well-understood phenomenon in which carbonate sand cements into a hard slab along a shoreline. When sea level rises and the slab is submerged and stressed, it fractures along regular joints into rectangular blocks that can look laid. Multiple studies have supported this reading, including radiocarbon dates on the cement and analysis of the internal bedding, which in places runs continuously through adjacent blocks in a way that is very difficult to reconcile with the blocks having been quarried and placed. I think that explanation is likely correct, and I am telling you so plainly. But there are two things worth keeping. First, even under the beach rock reading, the feature marks an old shoreline. That is not trivial. It is a marker of exactly the drowned coastal geography we opened with, sitting in exactly the depth range where a human-occupied shoreline from around 10,000 years ago would be. Second, the way the Bimini debate was conducted did real damage. Because the site got branded as an Atlantis claim, serious survey of the surrounding shallow shelf became career hazardous. Attaching your name to Bimini was a way to stop getting grants, and the shallow Bahama Banks are precisely where genuinely important submerged early sites would be, if they exist. The controversy functioned as a fence. It kept the funded professionals out of a large, cheap, easily accessible search area for decades. That is the second mechanism. Not quarrying this time. Reputation. Same outcome. A region goes unexamined because looking at it does not pay. Now Port Royal, because Port Royal is the control experiment. Port Royal, Jamaica, was the richest and most notorious port in the English Caribbean. On the 7th of June, 1692, an earthquake dropped a large portion of it straight into the harbor. Buildings, streets, warehouses, people. The ground liquefied, and the town went into the water more or less intact, and more or less instantly. What sits under Kingston Harbor today is the closest thing the hemisphere has to a sealed 17th century time capsule. Excavations, particularly the long-running work run out of Texas A&M, recovered building foundations still standing, complete rooms, wooden structural timber, ceramics in place, and famously a pocket watch that stopped at the moment of the disaster. Port Royal proves the region can preserve a submerged built environment beautifully. It proves the archaeology is technically achievable. It also shows why we know about it. Port Royal is shallow. It is inside a harbor. It belongs to a single clear jurisdiction. It is datable to the day. It has a documented narrative, and it can be turned into heritage tourism. Every single funding condition is satisfied simultaneously. Now change one variable. Move it to 100 meters down on an open shelf. Remove the written record, remove the date, remove the identifiable owner, and remove the tourism angle. The physics of preservation are unchanged. The site is still there. The funding case collapses entirely. We do not have an evidence problem in the Caribbean. We have an incentive problem that produces the appearance of an evidence problem, and the incentive problem did not stop when the sugar did. Look at what the islands were converted into once Kane stopped paying. Trinidad has oil, and it has the Pitch Lake at La Brea, a natural asphalt deposit that Walter Raleigh used in 1595 to caulk his ships, and that has been commercially mined ever since. Jamaica has bauxite, and from the 1950s onward, the island was reorganized around aluminum ore for North American smelters, with the mining leases cutting across the interior. Aruba and Curacao became refining points. Puerto Rico became a manufacturing and pharmaceutical platform under a specific tax arrangement, and a set of islands became something else entirely. The Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, the Bahamas, Bermuda, Turks, and Caicos. Ground with no significant natural resource was converted into jurisdiction. The product is the law: company registration, banking secrecy, tax treatment. A rock with a legislature turned out to be worth more than a rock with a mine, and by a very wide margin, which produces a genuinely strange final image. The Caribbean is now, in dollar terms, one of the most valuable regions on the planet because trillions of dollars are legally domiciled in it, and essentially none of that money touches the ground. It does not fund a national museum. It does not fund a deep water research vessel. It does not fund a shelf survey. The value is attached to the jurisdiction, not to the place, and the place remains one of the least archaeologically resourced regions in the Americas. Meanwhile, the ground itself is still being sold, and the process is unchanged in structure from the encomienda. Beachfront is consolidated into large holdings for resort development. Cruise terminals are built on harbor sites. Limestone is quarried for the concrete that builds them. Sites are identified during clearance, and sometimes are recorded, and sometimes are not. And the difference is usually a question of whether there is a national heritage agency with the staff and the legal power to stop a bulldozer for a month. Many of these states have populations under 100,000 people. The math is what the math has always been, and on top of all of it, the sea is doing again what it did before. Caribbean sea level is rising, and coastal erosion is accelerating, and hurricane intensity is a live and expensive question. Coastal archaeological sites, which is to say almost all of them, are being lost on a running basis. Middens erode into the surf. Petroglyph panels on shoreline rock take wave damage. It is happening now, quietly, everywhere, and there is no funded regional program remotely proportionate to the rate. So the layer we are worried about losing to the water is not only the deep one. There is a second layer going under while we are talking about the first. Let me finish with the part that undercuts the oldest version of this story, and it is the part I think matters most. For 400 years, the standard line was that the indigenous Caribbean was simply gone, extinct. The Taíno erased so completely that the islands were described as blank ground, repopulated from elsewhere. It was in the textbooks. It was, conveniently, also a legal and moral convenience, because a people who no longer exist cannot hold a claim. Genetics has now demonstrated that the line was false. Work published in the 2010s, including ancient DNA recovered from a roughly 1,000-year-old individual from the Bahamas, established direct genetic continuity between the pre-contact population and living people in the modern Caribbean. Substantial indigenous ancestry persists in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic, in Cuba. Broader ancient DNA surveys across the islands have gone further and reconstructed migration routes, showing at least 2 distinct dispersals into the Antilles and a surprisingly small effective population size, which itself suggests the pre-contact numbers may have been lower than the largest historical estimates. Some of that revision cuts against the dramatic version. That is what honest evidence does, but the headline is unambiguous. The extinction was a claim, not a finding. It was repeated for centuries because nobody with the resources to check had any reason to check, and several parties had a reason not to. It took a laboratory technique that did not exist until recently to overturn a fact that everybody knew. So when somebody tells you the drowned shelves of the Caribbean hold nothing, ask them the only question that matters. Not what do you believe. Ask who paid for the survey. Because the record here is consistent. The past in this region has been valued, priced, and disposed of continuously since 1492. Gold first, then bodies, then cane, then bauxite and oil, then the beach, then the legal jurisdiction itself. At every stage, the ground has been worth something specific to somebody specific, and at every stage, what was underneath it was worth less than what was on top. Every one of those decisions was rational for the people making it, and that is the uncomfortable part. Nobody had to conspire. A quarry manager, a developer, a grant board, a ministry all acted sensibly. And the sum is one whole region whose deep past has never been properly looked at. There is a sonar target off western Cuba nobody has revisited in over 20 years. There are drowned coastal plains the size of small countries under the Bahama Banks that have never had a systematic archaeological survey. There are anoxic blue holes still holding perfectly preserved material that nobody has funded a dive on. There is rock art being quarried into aggregate. There are middens washing into the sea this week. None of that requires a lost civilization to be disturbing. The ordinary version is enough. Something was built here by people who were here for a very long time before anyone wrote anything down about them. And the reasons we cannot see most of it are not mysterious at all. They are on a balance sheet. Make of that what you will.